Yeah, had a good, everybody had at least an enjoyable week, safe week. We did, everything went as normal. But I think we're maybe looking at a colder week next week, so it sounds a little bubbly and a little bit of snow and stuff like that, but it's winter time. Today I want to talk about, the title I've got wrote down is who is the God of the Old Testament, the one who interacted with Moses and Abraham and all this, but it'll cover a little bit more than that, not just then, but now and in the future too. If kind of an overview, if I can get it all in there. And I asked the question, who created the heavens and the earth? Well, of course God did, but let's turn to John, Gospel of John chapter 1. Read something that I know we've all read before, but repetition, we can sometimes forget a little bit. John 1, chapter 1, in the beginning. Now, it's talking about the beginning. That's back before any of us were. That's in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. So, but it still doesn't tell us who the Word was. Verse 3, through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but darkness has not understood it. Verse 6, there came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light gives light to every man was coming into the world. So the Word was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, not of human decision or a husband's will, but of God. In verse no, I'm not reading that. I better put my glasses on if I want to see what I'm reading. 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So now we see that the Word was the one that we call Jesus Christ. He was also the one that did a lot of the actual creating. Sure, the plan was God the Father's, or a composite of the both, but the Word, the one that became Jesus, was the executor. He was the creator, the one that did the things. So who created the heavens and the earth? Well, the one that we call Jesus. Who walked with Adam in the garden? Genesis 3 and 8. Again, I would have to conclude it was Jesus. And who blessed Abraham and made a covenant with him? Genesis 17 and 8. And who met with Abraham and spoke of Sodom and Gomorrah? Of course, that's Genesis 18, 1 through 13. Let's turn there and we'll read what we got there. And also promised Sarah would bear a son. Genesis 18. Verse 1, the Lord appeared to Abraham near the great tree of Mamre. While he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day, Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. So Christ wasn't by himself. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent and met them and bowed low to the ground. So he could tell, I don't know how, but he knew it was very important visitors. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. And let me get you something to eat." So he realized he had a very important visitor. In fact, I think he must have realized it was God. And down in verse 10, "Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." And of course, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were already old and advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure?" So she didn't really believe it. But the point of the story is, it was Christ that appeared there with two angels, and they went on to talk about him having a son, and also then to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. But here we're just trying to get the idea of Christ and what he's done throughout the ages. And then later on, who appeared to Moses and the elders of Israel on Mount Sinai? Of course, that's in Exodus 24, 9 and 11. And again, it was the Word, or Christ. And who did Moses see in his glory on Mount Sinai at that same time? Of course, again, it was Christ, and he saw his glorified form in a way because he hid him in the cleft of a rock and then passed by and let Moses look out and see the backside of him, because Moses had asked to see him in his glorified state, and I guess had to put out his hand and cover Moses even at that. And that brings us to who wrote the 10 Commandments on stone tablets? Again, that was Christ, Exodus 31:18. And you know, too, at the creation, when he created the heavens and the earth, and I'm going back a little bit, quite a bit. But again, that was Christ that created that. And we shouldn't forget that he created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. And on the seventh day, he rested. And not only just rest, he hallowed that day, sanctified it, made it holy. We can't make a day holy. We can't decide we're going to make a day holy and keep a day holy. We can observe the holy day. But that's what he did. He made the day holy and observed it himself by resting. So every time we observe the weekly Sabbath, we're actually acknowledging that God is a great creator, which now we hear in all of our schools and things. Oh no, there was no creator. It just happened. It was somehow, it just automatically, big bang, something happened. So anyway, and then we're to believe that we're not to keep, once Christ died, we're not to keep the Sabbath anymore. No evidence for that I can find. And then we get to who was the spiritual rock that accompanied Israel in the wilderness. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 10. First Corinthians 10, verse 1. And of course, Paul talking, he says, "I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud." You know, the cloud that led the people by day. "And that they all passed through the sea." Of course, in their escape from Egypt. "They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food," the manna that came down, "and drank the same spiritual drink. for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So it makes it pretty plain which God they were dealing with. Not God the Father, but the Word, Christ. And let's go also back to the Gospel of John, John 1:18, because I have another question. If we can't find the answer here in the Bible, then we won't have a good answer. John 1 and 18. And my question was, has anyone seen the Father? Well, we know Moses saw the Word, saw Christ, but has anyone seen God the Father? John 1. In the beginning was, I need 18. I'm lost a little bit. 18, verse 18. Verse 18 tells us, no one has ever seen God except God, the one and only. And it's got a footnote, D there, and it says the only begotten, which was Christ. No one has ever seen God but Christ, the one and only, who is at the Father's side and has made him known. And of course, Christ is at the Father's side now. He's our high priest. That's what he's serving now. He's not yet king of the earth. Not yet taken that seat. And I've also got John chapter 6 down here, so we'll see what that says. John chapter 6 and 46. Here, I'll start in 44. It says, this is red letters, it's Christ speaking. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. In verse 46, no one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. Only he has seen the Father. And that's true to this very day, but I think, of course, it's a story for another time, but God the Father will come to this earth at the end of the 1,000 years when sin has been done away with. And of course, in John 8 and 58, Christ says, before Abraham was born, I am, and he was exhibiting the fact to the Jews at that time that he preceded Abraham. You know, they put most all their faith in Abraham. And it says, therefore, and then therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions. And that's in Hebrew. We'll turn to Hebrew 1. That's Paul trying to prove that Christ has this great authority, which he did prove. Hebrews 1. Sorry, I'm kind of slow here. 8 and 9. Verse 8, but about the Son, and it's talking about Christ, but about the Son, he says, the Father speaking, your throne, O God, will last forever. This is God talking to the Word. Your throne, O God, will last forever, and righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions, his anointing of you with the oil of joy. And that's that footnote there, that quote is coming from Psalms 102, 25 and 27, but I'm not going to read it right now, but you can check that. And also, we can turn to Luke chapter 1. And verse 29. Well, I'm going to start in 26. And again, this is talking about Jesus. And verse 26, in Luke 1:26, it says, "In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, to a woman in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, 'Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you.' Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, 'Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. Of all things, Christ is to inherit David's throne.'" Of course, that's a story for another day too, because many people say, "Well, there's no David's throne." "And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will never end." So again, that's what Jesus will be doing in the future, reigning over the house, over the whole world, but from Zion, from Jerusalem, in fact, but over the whole world, and he'll be sitting on David's throne. It says it right there, so it must be so. And in closing, let's turn to Matthew 19. Matthew 19, 28. I'll find it in a minute. Okay. Jesus said to them, here he's talking to his disciples, he's just talking about how hard it is for a rich man to enter heaven. And of course they asked him, they were a little bit disturbed at that, and they wanted to know what their reward would be and all that. And he told them, he said, "I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things," and the renewal of all things will be when Christ returns to this world and banishes Satan from the earth, banishes wickedness from the earth, and installs his kingdom. "At the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." So that tells us, we've talked about in the very beginning, we've talked about in ancient times what Christ was doing. We've talked about now what he's doing, sitting with his Father on his throne as our high priest. And then this tells what he's going to be doing in the future. So that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about. And I think it's good to keep that in mind, who Jesus is and all the things he's done for us, all God the Father's done for us, and how much we owe him. Thank you.
It'd be okay. Sharon's written the church a beautiful card. So I wanted to just read what Sharon Kate said, the famous Sabbath school teacher from Branson. But though the words are simple, I hope you know how much warmth and appreciation come with them. Thank you all so very much for the beautiful flowers and plaque Thank you for your prayers and all of your concerns for me. She's, of course, recovering from her big operation. I'm so thankful for my church, family, and for finding you. I love you all, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, I'm going to pass over the middle song, let you all scream and jump up and down. And we're going to go right to the sermon. It's called Appreciate Our Gifts of Knowledge. Appreciate what God has given us. We actually have more prophetic information and knowledge than well, we just have more than others and more insight. It's not us. It's not because we're smart or even necessarily all that righteous. I mean, we try to be, but you know what I mean. There are great people out in the world, geniuses. They don't have that insight because God has not given it to them. We have it only as a gift of God. Even our calling is a gift of God. It's not because we're special. So we want to stay humble and appreciative. We mentioned it last night in the podcast. Like Daniel, he used his insight to help the king. And he could have put all the attention on himself. There are actually a lot more verses that we could have mentioned about Daniel's humility, but it was not all about him. It was about serving. And really, if we know more than others, it's because God's Spirit gave it to us. I want to read Zechariah 4:6. Zechariah 4:6 reads, Zechariah 4:6. Then he answered and spoke to me, saying, This is the word of the Lord, or Jehovah, to Zerubbabel, saying, Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. In other words, anything that's accomplished is not by human might or money or resources or numbers, is by the Spirit of God. His Spirit has given the church insight. For instance, how do we know about Brexit? We knew way back when Britain got involved in the common market, even though it was started with the Treaty of Rome. Italy, Germany, and France started it. But we knew that when Britain got involved, they would eventually leave because we knew we knew some prophetic definitions of who was who. By the way, if you were to go back to the 60s and 70s, there were churches saying America would be the beast because we were the greatest superpower. I know you're laughing at that now, but and all kinds of weird things they were saying. We knew none of that was likely to be true. We also said the Soviet Union will fall because you couldn't have that big thing in half of Europe and the Holy Roman Empire as we understand it existing. We said it long before they had all their problems, economic and corruption and all the things that made them bad news. We said it before. How do we know? Because God gave us the insight about who was who in Bible prophecy. God's Spirit is the key. We have to be humble and learn to appreciate God's Spirit and what God's Spirit has done. And we have those key identities. Who is Israel? Who is the Holy Roman Empire? And I think it's wrong for us to think that we are smarter than others. No, we're not. God has just gifted us. Like Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, there's a God in heaven. Now, I'm sure there are many wise men with obviously more experience than Daniel, who was probably at the time only 20 or 21. He said, but the God of heaven has given me this gift. And I believe what we're going to see in the future is narcissism. If you read, I'm not going to read 2 Timothy 3, but most of you know it. It says in the end times will be perilous, dangerous times, for men will be lovers of themselves. I use the term narcissism. You see a lot of stars and athletes. They do a lot of bragging. They didn't used to do that 50, 60 years ago. It's a society of narcissists. It's all about me. Even true love is really more sex than true love, more lust than true love. It's all about the person, narcissism. You see it in society. Bragging, signs of the end, boasting, being selfish. People are very, very selfish. And I would argue probably people under the age of 50 are probably significantly more narcissistic and selfish than people over 50. And you'll start seeing more and more signs of it. And as the older generation passes on and the new leadership comes, you're going to see it's going to get worse. More narcissistic, more selfish. We have to remain above that, godly. Any talents we have, any insight we have, is to be used in what I call servant leadership, like Daniel had. Because God has given us whatever insight He's given us. Like a lot of churches don't know what Carl Hill just said, that Christ was the God of the Old Testament. God the Father, I'm going to make an assumption here, is too righteous to come to this earth until it gets cleaned up by God the Son. So Moses walked with the one that eventually became Jesus Christ, but we call him God the Son, or the spokesperson, or the administrator, how you like to look at it. That's the one we dealt with. That's the one that led Moses and the Israelites, and it appeared to Joshua and all those other things in the Bible that you see, or appeared to Paul when he was on trial, which we're looking at in our Bible study now. It was Jesus Christ. We have that. Most churches don't know that. No idea who the real Christ is. They really don't. They see that picture painted in the Middle Ages with that model. I won't get into it now, but you realize they didn't know what Christ looked like when they painted that during the Dark Ages or Middle Ages. What are you going to call it? But we have to be servant leaders. Stay humble. Servant leadership, so that we can witness to others and be as selfless as possible. Matthew 25:5. Matthew 25:5. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. In other words, there will be forces in the future that will lull people to sleep. And they all slept, so it'll even lull people who are called to some extent. And at midnight, a cry was made, "Oh, we realize that the Messiah is going to be coming back soon. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their spiritual lamps. But the foolish said to the wise, "We can't get our lamp going. We don't have enough oil. Give us some of your oil, for our lamps have gone out." In other words, they had spiritually let themselves become, I'll use this term, too narcissistic, too selfish, too thinking about self, which is the way the world is going. They're caught up in the me, bragging only what I want. You can bribe me easily, just give me some freebies. That kind of thinking. I don't think higher or more character. And the way it's implied is maybe half the people who think they're in God's church will let their spiritual lamp be gone when Christ comes. I mean, that's one of the warnings of the end time. Actually, Matthew 24, the disciples ask Christ, "When will the end come?" Well, he gives them advice about staying ever ready. And then in Matthew 25, and it's the same presentation, he gives 3 additional warnings. I won't go through them all now, but one was, don't fall asleep spiritually and get lulled asleep by the world. Stay humble like Daniel. Well, one of the oils is not being narcissistic, being selfless. You want to use what God has given us in a humble way to serve the world. It's the opposite of narcissism. That's the oil that they had left. Obviously, anything we do, the credit goes to God. Any knowledge we have, the credit goes to God, to Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit is his vehicle or tool. The credit goes to God. Matthew 25:12. But he answered and said, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you." Now, why would Christ say to half of those virgins, "I do not know you"? Well, what are we supposed to be doing between now and the return of Christ? Aren't we supposed to be, as Lincoln said, getting on God's side? Because they argue, well, who is God's side on? Lincoln says, well, we got to get on God's side. I love that statement. even if it was political or not, there's a certain genius to it. We have to get on God's side. But what he's really saying is, between now and whenever Christ, let's say if he's coming back in 8 years. I'm not setting dates, by the way, here, or 10 years, whatever it is. During these next 8 years, we have to get closer and closer to Christ, or at least work at it. So we know Christ and he knows us through prayer, Bible study, church attendance, fellowship, showing love, maybe a little charity here and there when possible, if you can afford it. But do godly things. He says, I don't know you. You folks have drifted too far away from me. Verse 13, therefore watch. In other words, stay alert spiritually. Stay alert. Stay alert. For you do not know either the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man comes. We might get the seasons, we might see it getting closer because of prophetic things we know, but there's going to be a surprise in there somewhere, somehow. So you have to stay ready. 2 Corinthians 12, 2 Corinthians 12:6. 12:6 reads, for if I desire to boast, I shall not be foolish, for I will speak the truth. But I spare lest anyone should think of me being beyond what he sees me and hears of me. Now Paul is defending himself against the Judaizers and false apostles that have insinuated themselves in the Corinthian church after he left. You know, they stab him in the back. After he's gone, they sneak in, pretend to be, and then they undermine Paul. And people are good at undermining leadership. By the way, I'm just giving an opinion. If somebody says, hey, I know some people in that church and they're hypocrites. They're not as good as they would like to be. That doesn't prove anything in the Bible is false. That doesn't prove Christianity is false. Doesn't even prove the church is false. That doesn't even prove that they're not church leaders. It just proves what everybody knows. Human nature is fallible, right? I can preach to you that we should obey every single thing in the law and be as good as we could, and I might make a mistake or two. Well, and see, if someone's trying to undermine you, and people are good at undermining others. I can tell you stories, but you don't want to hear them now. Well, I don't like the way he put that. He could have been more tactful. He should have done this instead of that. Well, of course. You can criticize anybody, and you might even have a little truth. By the way, Satan is smart. He uses a little bit of truth and then a lot of twists and lies. And the truth is like the tip of the hook. It grabs you. Well, that's true. These guys are not perfect, so we're not perfect. So what else is new, right? And then they drag you down with the hook. So at any rate, they were undermining Paul. So Paul in his defense talks about God took him in vision to heaven. And then verse 7. And by surpassing revelations, lest I not be made haughty, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be made haughty. In other words, Paul is saying he went to heaven and he heard things, some things he can't even write down. And apparently Paul had the gift of speaking the heavenly language, the language of angels, apparently, from what he said. Paul got to see things that I'm assuming no other apostle, or at least few others, got to see, as far as we know. Great revelations. We're still reading his, the New Testament is mostly Paul's writings. We're still learning from Paul to this day. And God said, I've given you these great revelations. It's going to go to your head. You're going to get the big head. Even as great as Paul was, God said, I'm going to let Satan give you these, I assume they were eye headaches, whatever it was, to keep you humble. Buffet me, lest I be made haughty. Verse 8. For this thing I besought the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. But God didn't. Even the great Paul, God put something in there to keep Paul humble. Now think about it. You know how great Paul was? Even Paul needed things to keep him humble. So we're not great or anything like that, but we need to work at staying humble. Don't take too much credit for all the things you know. God gave it to you. Even the great Paul needed to realize, because of his great revelations, the gift was from God and was given to serve. And he's been serving through the centuries through his writings. Out of the mouth of children. This is a corny little story, but it kind of makes a point. Little Philip was spending the weekend with his grandmother, and they went to the park, and it was beautiful snow, and the grandmother said, look at this beautiful, and we may get to see some snowy landscapes in the next couple of weeks, we shall see. God painted this landscape for you, little Philip. And Philip said, oh, it's wonderful, wonderful. And he said, and he did it all with his left hand. And his grandmother said, what do you mean he did it with his left hand? Well, I was taught this in church, that Christ sits on his right hand. Christ sits on his right hand. Well, you realize, of course, that little Philip doesn't understand what that expression means. But a lot of people don't understand the Bible because it hasn't been given to them yet. And our world is full of braggarts, people that want to take credit for everything they have. I would even argue, if you have a beautiful face, beautiful hair, or the ability with a little, good diet and workouts and stuff, to have great muscles and, be a great athlete, it's probably because God gave you the right genes. They're now believing a lot of things are genetic. All kinds of talents, personality traits, is programmed into you. I know you have to develop it and practice and eat well and all that stuff, but you get what I mean. You shouldn't walk around strutting, man, look at, that girl told me how handsome I was. And you get all proud. Well, I mean, it's a good thing you're handsome, but it's God gave it to you. You know what I'm saying, right? I'm not going to say any more and make you in trouble, but you get the general point. Anything we know, knowledge, is a gift from God through his Holy Spirit. It's not us. In a contextual sense, nobody is that special. Bill O'Reilly has a book written about how celebrity destroyed some great people like Elvis Presley, and there is a certain something to that book. I'm giving an opinion. If you become, this was true of Elvis, but I believe it's been true of other celebrities, Michael Jackson. I don't name them, but I could rattle off some. You probably agree. You're so famous that everybody does what you want. You had weird drugs that give it to you. Like Elvis was able to ask people at the mall. He couldn't go to the mall because it would cause such a stampede of people to see him. They'd have to shut the thing down. They opened the mall late at night only for him and his entourage. All that was had to say, that's what I want. They would do it. When you get so famous, everybody and all the girls are going, oh. Some of you know what I mean. And you think you're special. And I'm not saying he wasn't good looking and musical, and compared to today's rockers, he looks like a saint. But the point I want to make is thinking you're special and people treating you like you're special is really bad for you. Think about it. It's really bad for you. Everybody wants to be famous. But talk to some people who are friends of people who are famous. Fame has a cost. Fame has a cost. Thinking you're special is not good for you. You're not special. I mean, well, in one context, you're special to God. And as that song says, God has our back because he's called us. You're special in that sense, and you should try to stay away from sin and treat yourself and your body wisely. But in another sense, you're not really special. You're just another human being God has called. Appreciate our calling and stay humble. 2 Corinthians 12. This is the same discussion that Paul was having. We read verse 8. Verse 9. God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. For years, I've been struggling how to understand that. I'm still struggling how to understand that. That my power is made perfect in weakness. At least in part, God is saying, whatever gifts the Holy Spirit has given you, if you appreciate that you're a weak human being, if you stay humble, God's power, it's like an axe with a sharp blade. It's more effective. But if you get puffed up because you're getting more attention, because you know something others don't know, or whatever it is, then it won't be as effective. My power is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my weaknesses than the power of Christ, that the power of Christ may overshadow me. In other words, if Paul says, yeah, I have a lot of weaknesses, apparently he had bad eyes and eye headaches, and maybe there's more to it than that, but whatever it was, Paul, in a way, he took pride in it. Another way of looking at it, too, if because you have some truth, people start to persecute you and criticize you. And I know you can be upset at that, which is natural, but there's another way to take it. The other way to take it is, it's a cost for having God's truth, and that criticism may keep you humble, but it's an indication that God is with you, if that makes any sense. In other words, if what you're saying has no validity, they wouldn't care. They'd laugh at you, and yeah, no big deal. He says, that's crazy old Uncle Bob. He says bad stuff. Nobody pays me attention. But the fact that you're hitting the truth, they're criticizing because you're effective. You think about that. Some of the people that draw the greatest criticism because they're effective and they have the truth. I see that in politics. I see it all the time. So you can glory in the fact that you have the truth, even if occasionally, Peter says, take joy in persecution. I know that sounds weird, but I think I understand how he meant it. It proves that you're doing the right thing and God is with you. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 10. But God has revealed them to us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God. Verse 11. For who among men knows the things of man except the spirit of man within him? And what Paul is saying is, you read the whole context, even later in that chapter, and before that chapter, Paul says, not many of the mighty and great are called. That means you're just regular Corinthians. God didn't call the noble, the great, or the mighty. He called you all, so don't get puffed up about it. And God's Spirit allows you to understand, see things that nobody else can see. Nobody else can see, except the spirit of man within him. So also no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. And what he's saying is, they're trying to create robots that are self-aware. Now, I believe this is true. There are animals that are a little higher IQ than others. But for the most part, animals are not self-aware. They can't stop and think about themselves philosophically. They do what they do. They have instinct. And there are some dogs with very high instinct for herding sheep and hunting and tracking. They've been bred for that. And especially among predators like orcas, killer whales, they say they're very intelligent in cornering fish and other prey or wolf packs. Very clever. But they don't have what we call the spirit in man. They don't have that ability of self-awareness. And robots can do things. They can even, I'm told they did this for artificial intelligence. When the robot runs into something it can't handle, it's given maybe like 13 options like a circle. So it's programming says, okay, check this option, that option, that option, that. And it goes in, and you can do it quickly to see which one works best, if any of them. But that's not the same thing as self-awareness. I'm told, now they're all kind of science fiction stories. All of a sudden, the robots become self-aware in a way that doesn't fit a machine. They start saying, well, wait a minute. If I have smarter, higher IQ, and I can use all this data, I'm better than people. How come I shouldn't be in charge? And then the robots turn on people. That's the science fiction theme of many movies. But so far, they can't do it. The spirit in man is something special. And Paul is saying men can understand deep human things, but they can't understand spiritual things. As he says, so also no one knows things of God except the Spirit of God. In other words, like some people said to me once, I don't understand you and Carl, and I won't go into the details why he said it. I just don't understand you, man. And I think I knew what he meant. We're being motivated, hopefully, by God's Holy Spirit And he was thinking just in carnal human terms. Oh, carnal human terms is not worth their, whatever, how he would put it. They can't understand us. We can understand them because we have our human petty nature. We can understand them, but they cannot really understand us. I don't understand why you're doing it. But we're blessed to have that Spirit of God. The only reason we can understand them and we can know certain spiritual things and prophetic things, and we're probably going to understand more things as things go. I just mentioned one. A lot of churches are starting to see this. You know, they're celebrating the Defense of Marriage Act. Actually, it's not the defense of marriage. It's ending that law. It's actually the destruction of marriage or the watering down of marriage. What they're doing is taking all God's guardrails for marriage and throwing them down. So now marriage is just about lust and sex. No, marriage is a covenant relationship. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but the truth is, people who know the Bible know it. The world is celebrating. And, you know, they're going to bring in, I think it's called minor attracted persons. That's the next thing coming. You think about that. You can work on a 10-year-old. Never mind, you don't want to hear it. You get the idea of what's coming. Because I never thought we'd have drag queens celebrating at the White House. Like the point I'm getting at is, the world is going to be deceived on a lot of these things. And you can see it coming, like a freight train is heading, and the world will pay a price. Families' values will drop. The value of real marriage will drop. Children's upbringing and training will drop. Everything will get worse. We can see, because we understand the Bible clearly and others do not, it's not because we're smarter, it's because God's Spirit is in us. So what we should do is be thankful, remain humble, be thankful that God has given us insight that others haven't. Be humble, be determined where possible to use whatever insights and gifts God has given us to help witness to the world. Just help the church when you can and encourage people when you can. I know the opportunities may not seem so great, and all the heights of power are controlled by Satan. You know, the publishing industry, the media, academia, K through 12 now, apparently library association, from stuff I can take. Did I mention Hollywood? Everybody is controlled by Satan, everything. And so, and many even biblical seminaries are being undermined by Satan. I could give you some more stories, but you'll be hearing more in the future. As Satan gets control, and I'm assuming that God is allowing this to test man and to teach us some hard lessons. We need to witness to the world the truth. They need the truth in a world that's lost. But we have to not let it, remember I started Matthew 25, don't let the world get us to fall asleep. Don't let the world suck us into that. Stay humble, stay committed to God. Stay determined to help and serve as God has guided us to do so for the glory of God.